All right. Hello again, Avengers, and welcome to another exciting Daily December. This is Daily December number 7, and today this is going to be late. I already know it's going to be late because most of these videos have taken taken about an hour to record, and I have half an hour left of the 7th. So forgive me. I am sleeping a normal amount of time, which is not something I'm used to right now. And by normal amount, I mean I got like 6.5 hours of sleep today, which for me is really good. But it just so happened I got that 6.5 hours of sleep towards the middle to the end of the day, and then it took me a long time to convince myself to get out of bed. So, that being said, I want to continue our journey through the history of tabletop RPGs, specifically by focusing on the 2010s. Now, something interesting about the 2010s, as I mentioned in the last video, the OGL created this massive upsurge of indie developers being able to sell products without having to create their own system and everything like that, and being able to kind of piggyback on the success of D&D the 3rd edition that had never been done before. And as the 2000s moved forward, we started seeing a lot more indie RPGs that were actually gaining a foothold, not like a single competitor to D&D, like Vampire the Masquerade was, and White Wolf in general was in the 90s. So starting with the and then at the very end of the 2000s, we had Pathfinder launched, which showed that the player base and the audience could dictate what they wanted in a tabletop RPG, instead of just kind of sitting back and hoping that a publisher will make it for them. That, you know, this is the kind of D&D that we like. And so Pathfinder made that, instead of going, well, D&D is now 4th edition. D&D is now power-based. That's what we have to deal with. And so I really do think Pathfinder inspired a lot more independent studios to start kind of figuring out what kind of games they wanted to play and then making those games. So without any further ado, let's look into tabletop RPGs of the 2010s. The first thing we have to talk about, because it is probably, I think it's probably when you consider all of the different games that use this system in addition to this particular system, I think this is probably the best independently developed RPG ever, and that is Apocalypse World. Apocalypse World, when it first came out, did make some waves. It's a post-apocalyptic tabletop RPG, but the interesting thing about Apocalypse World was how it handled playing the game. Instead of having a character class that had all of these different abilities as you leveled up, and having all these different rules for, you know, this is how you do a grapple check, and this is how Apocalypse World was extremely rules light and story focused. So your abilities or skills, or whatever you want to call them in this game, were called moves, and they were intentionally designed to be very vaguely worded, so that if you go, well, I want to, you know, run up to this dude, poke him in the eye, and then kick his shin, to try and convince him to chase me instead of my friend. You could do that, and you wouldn't need a rule for eye poking, a rule for shin kicking, and then chase rules. You would just find a move that most closely fits the effect that you wanted, and then that would be the move that you would try. It's a 2d6 system, meaning you roll 2d6 and you add a modifier to it. Generally, I don't think the modifiers get higher than a +3, so it's a very, very low math system. And another thing that's unique about Apocalypse World that I haven't really seen in other tabletop RPGs up to this point was they effectively had succeed at a cost mechanics. Basically, the way that all Powered by the Apocalypse games work, which is what all the games that would use this kind of basic framework would eventually be called Powered by the Apocalypse. The way that it would work is if you roll a 6 or lower, you fail. If you roll a 10 or higher, you succeed. But if you roll between a 7 and a 10, you succeed, but it doesn't quite work the way that you want it to. Or you succeed at a cost. Now, later on, a lot of different RPGs would use mechanics similar to this. Sorry, I'm just looking at... I'm about to sneeze. Excuse me. Sorry about that. All right, so getting back to this. So, this idea of succeeding at a cost was technically always something that was available to GMs. But, and feel free to correct me in the comments down below if somebody else kind of originated this idea and Apocalypse World just kind of utilized it. But the idea of failure can move this story forward, or a success doesn't always mean, hey, you get everything that you want, massively changes how you can run games. And for me personally, I didn't discover this particular idea until I started running Open Legend, which we will talk about in a little bit. But it really made my GMing style more dynamic because it's a lot more fun for the players when their roles matter. And if you have something where if you fail, you just get to keep trying again over and over until you succeed, then none of those roles actually mattered because you were going to succeed eventually. And the same thing is true where if you roll high enough, it doesn't really matter how bad an idea of it. As long as you roll high enough, you succeed. That also kind of makes your decisions mean less, you know? But the idea of, well, you can succeed here, but it's going to come at a cost, is this really nice kind of halfway point that just makes everything more interesting for the players. It makes them consider their choices a little bit more. And yeah, now Apocalypse World in and of itself, again, it made some waves when it came out. It won the 2010 Indie RPG Award and the 2011 Golden Geek RPG of the Year. But it wasn't, groundbreaking. It didn't, sell 1 billion copies or anything like that. But it was really interesting. The thing that makes Apocalypse World something groundbreaking in tabletop RPGs was the fact that anyone could use the Apocalypse World engine, which eventually was called Powered by the Apocalypse, to create their own RPGs. Very, very similar to the OGL and the D20 license, but again, because of how rules light Apocalypse World was, it created a significantly larger variety of games than the D20 systems ever could achieve. Like, D20 based games are Dungeons and Dragons. Like, that's what they are. Yeah, you can put a lot of different flavors and changes to them, but because of how rules heavy third edition was, and therefore the original OGL was, any game that you made using the D20 system was going to feel like Dungeons and Dragons. It might be Dungeons and Dragons in space, or Dungeons and Dragons with pirates, or Dungeons and Dragons in a cyberpunk thing, but it was still Dungeons and Dragons. Because Apocalypse World was so much more open-ended, you could have games that feel nothing alike except for the fact that they use playbooks instead of classes and moves instead of skills or abilities or things like that. And they all play very differently. I personally have played and run, actually, Avatar Legends, which is a Powered by the Apocalypse game set in the Avatar universe. And it is so refreshing simply because part of creating your character is choosing their fighting style. And as far as fighting styles are concerned, there are 4 different bending styles: earth, water, wind, fire. But also, there are 2 non-bending styles. You have weapons and then technology. And the thing that makes that just so different is, doesn't really matter which playbook that you choose, your fighting style is still going to create a very, very unique character. Even if you have 2 playbooks that are kind of similar or have similar themes, the fact that you're a firebender and they are an earthbender makes it a very, very different experience, because all of your abilities are going to be flavored with your firebending or your earthbending or things like that. So yeah, Powered by the Apocalypse probably single-handedly created a huge upsurge in indie RPGs in general that we're still seeing today. So, moving on. The next RPG we'll be talking about is the Dragon Age RPG. Now, there's a couple of reasons we're talking about this. First, this was the first tabletop RPG I ever played in person on a tabletop. All my other TTRPG experience up until Dragon Age, the role-playing game, was done via computer games, since this is stuff like that, which I understand is not the same thing. I'm not saying that it is, but playing a lot of 3rd edition based games gave me a really good understanding of how 3rd edition works, despite the fact that video games don't handle it the exact same way as tabletop RPGs do. I still understood how feats worked. I still understood the leveling system and multi-classing and all that stuff. I just didn't have all of the nitty-gritty because different computer versions of those RPGs treated things differently. The other reason that I'm talking about the Dragon Age RPG was this was the first iteration of what would eventually be called the Age system, which is Green Ronin's proprietary tabletop RPG system, and they are still publishing it today. The Dragon Age RPG eventually evolved into what was called the Fantasy Age system. And then that eventually evolved into the Modern Age system. And now Green Ronin actually gets licenses for things like The Expanse, which is probably their most popular tabletop RPG, uses a variation on the Modern Age system. The other thing that I find really unique about Age system games in general is if you look at the difference between like Pathfinder and Starfinder, which is basically fantasy versus sci-fi, they're still relatively the same game. They still work for the most part in the same way. There's some slight changes to rules, there's some slight changes to the skills available to you, and obviously the classes are a little bit different. But the core structure of the game is identical. If you know how to create a character in Pathfinder, you can create a character in Starfinder with very little help. The difference between Fantasy Age and Modern Age is significantly larger. Whereas Fantasy Age is very much a class-based system where you choose your class, and that's probably the biggest differentiator of how your character is going to play. Then you can also choose your race, if I remember correctly. When you get to the modern age, you still do have classes as a sort, but you also have your kind of economic status. You have your job. Like it's a very, very, very different system. And while yes, it still uses like the stunt system that is one of the reasons why the Dragon Age RPG and age system games in general are so fun. It plays very, very differently, and understanding the Fantasy Age system gives you a slight leg up to the modern age system. It doesn't. It's not a one-to-one translation like going from D&D to the D20 Star Wars based game. The D20 Star Wars game is D&D in space with Jedi. Like that's what it is. They use almost the same identical feats. That's how it works. So yeah, Green Ronin in and of itself has been doing some amazing stuff for years. So had to mention one of their first big ones. And again, this is another example of video games starting to influence the tabletop RPG space, like the EverQuest tabletop RPG. The big difference being the EverQuest tabletop RPG was not successful in any way, shape, or form. It's kind of a novelty. It's interesting, but it really didn't go anywhere. Dragon Age RPG, people still play it today. Green Ronin stopped publishing things for it in 2019, but with the Fantasy Age being almost completely backwards compatible with the Dragon Age TTRPG, you can still have a lot of fun playing the Dragon Age RPG. So yeah, moving on. The next tabletop RPG we shall talk about is Stars Without Numbers. This one is interesting for a number of reasons, probably the biggest of which, if anyone is not aware, Stars Without Numbers is a generic space-based RPG, and it does have a pre-built kind of campaign setting that you can use, but it was intentionally designed to be as vague as physically possible, so you can use it to really play any kind of science fiction-based RPG. But the thing that makes this so interesting is Stars Without Numbers is part of the old school Renaissance, the OSR movement, which, if you remember, in the last video, we talked about that kind of resurgent tabletop, resurgent like old school movement where they somebody actually took the D20 system and recreated Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition in it, so that people could play AD&D with modern support to it, and to make it significantly easier for third-party publishers to create AD&D content without having to run into issues with copyright and stuff. Well, Stars Without Numbers is kind of part of that same old school Renaissance movement, but Stars Without Numbers does not play anything like D&D. Stars Without Numbers, one of the systems that I actually own, is still very table-based, because of course it is. But it doesn't feel like, oh, this is D&D in space. It has its very own... it's got its very own feel, and it's been unbelievably popular. This is another one that is still being published and supported to this day. There is a second version of Stars Without Numbers called Worlds Without Number, which is the fantasy version of it. The other thing that's kind of interesting, again, harkening back to the old, like even going as far back as D&D Basic, there's only 4 classes in Stars Without Numbers. And if you guys remember any of my What is a Insert Class Here series, I talked about in the very beginning, early versions of D&D really focused on the difference between your class is the different ways that you would interact with the game, where you had your fighter was, I use weapons to attack things. And then your magic user was, I cast spells to attack things. And then your priest was, I cast spells to help the party. And that was your basic 3 things that you needed. Either you used weapons, you used offensive magic, or you used support/defensive magic. And that's how it worked. Eventually they introduced the thief, which was, I do things outside of combat. And that was really all that was necessary. And your class wasn't meant to give you this huge lore dump. It was just meant to be, this is mechanically how I deal with combat, or this is mechanically how I deal with the game. Stars Without Numbers kind of goes back to that system where you have the warriors class, which is based on kind of weapons-based combat. You have the psychics class, which is their version of magic, doing supernatural things. Then you had the experts class, which was designed around skills and, being really, really good at doing stuff outside of combat. And then the 4th class was called adventurers, and it was basically, that was your multi-class. Adventurers would basically take lesser versions of 2 other classes, smash them together, and that would be your class. So you could be a warrior psychic or an expert warrior or something like that, and that's how adventurers worked. And so because of that, it seems like a very simplistic system, but it does work for exactly what it's supposed to do. All the rest of the flavor for your class comes literally from that. Yes, they have, psychic skills, which is their kind of equivalent of spells and stuff like that, and different weapons and things like that. But for the most part, you are kind of using the system to create the character that you want to play, as opposed to figuring out what kind of character you want to play based on what the system will allow you to do. Cine Nomine is the company that publishes it, and they make some really, really awesome stuff. So, yeah, definitely, again, as part of the old school Renaissance movement, this was really, really big, because it stopped being, hey, this is D&D, this is old school D&D, to where they went, well, this isn't old school D&D, but we're going to use the same philosophy to create something new. So, yeah. Moving on. The next game we are talking about is the One Ring role-playing game. Again, I've talked about this. I talked about this in my kind of overview of the new Lord of the Rings 5e conversion that they have on D&D Beyond, which isn't actually new, but it's new for D&D Beyond. It was basically them taking the One Ring role-playing game and translating it into 5th edition D&D. Well, the One Ring role-playing game was actually published in 2011, originally by Cubicle 7, and the newer version is now published by a company called Free League Publishing. But, again, this is another thing that I find really, really fascinating, because the genesis of Dungeons and Dragons was you had a bunch of war gamers who war games way back in the 60s and 70s was mostly recreating like World War II, World War I battles, and acting like a general. And then a couple guys went, hey, what if we could do like medieval battles? Like, what if we could do the 100 Years' War, or, you know, the War of the Roses, stuff like that? Well, that would be pretty cool. And so they did, and they created this system called chainmail. And then they went, you know, it'd be really, really cool. What if instead of being like commanders, what if we were just playing single characters, and instead of it being realistic, what if we could play a game like Lord of the Rings? Like, what if we could create a party like Lord of the Rings and go exploring and do stuff like that? Lord of the Rings was a massive, massive inspiration for Dungeons and Dragons in general. So much so that the Tolkien estate actually had to sue them a few times, which is why we have things like treants instead of trents, because Trent's was copywritten by the Tolkien estate. We also have, I can't remember what they're called in D&D. I'll look it up real quick here. What is it called? Has a specific... Balor. There we go. So, they had Balrogs in the original version of D&D, and that's another thing that is copyright of the Tolkien estate. So they changed that into Balors instead of Balrogs. They're the same creature, but they're called Balors instead of Balrogs. I actually have... It's hard to see, but this red thing right there, that is a Balor. So I have a Balor Mini because one of the D&D board games that I have over here, I think the Legend of Drizzt one of the monsters you would fight was a Balor. So yeah, the One Ring was kind of a return to, hey, let's create an RPG based on Lord of the Rings, mostly because by this point, by to the 2011, 4th edition was in full swing. 3rd edition had been extremely popular, and neither one of those editions really felt like Lord of the Rings in any way, shape, or form. Both of them were extremely high magic required. Like, you had to have magic in both of them in order to be able to exist. To the point where 4th edition actually had to create an alternate rule set for playing without magic items. Because they were such an integral part of the game. And that's just really not how the Lord of the Rings or the Hobbit or any of those worlds really worked. Magic was very, very rare, and it wasn't like casting fireballs and things like that. It's very, like, throughout the Hobbit and all the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Gandalf never once shoots a fireball at anyone. He does create magical shields every so often, but the rest of his magic is very subtle. You know, the closest he gets to actual kind of D&D style magic is he used to make magic fireworks. And it wasn't that he would cast fire into the sky. He made literal fireworks that had magic infused in them so they could do things that normal fireworks couldn't do. So the One Ring was an attempt to kind of bring back that idea of forming a fellowship, a group of friends, and going on a journey to do something grand. You know, reclaim an old dwarven stronghold from a dragon, destroy the One Ring. All of those the things. And the journey was just as important as the action scenes and all this stuff like that, which really wasn't a thing all the way back in the beginning of D&D. Again, Greyhawk, the entire campaign setting, was really based around the idea that Gary Gygax created this mega dungeon that the players just kept going down further and further and further, and realized that it was in their best interest to create something at the top of this dungeon so that they didn't have to go anywhere to adventure. Yeah, it's one of the things that I think the One Ring does better than just about any other tabletop RPG is how much of an emphasis it puts on the journey is just as important as the action scenes, as the parts where, you know, everything is going crazy. The other thing I really like about the One Ring role-playing game, which I wish more games would emulate, is the idea that as you go, the weapons that you're using, you can actually effectively upgrade them and turn them into kind of quasi magic items, instead of like going through a dungeon and going, hey, here's a new sword. I'm just going to throw away the one that I'm really used to, that I understand how everything works with it, and I'm just going to use this brand new, completely untested sword that I just found on the ground. So, yeah, it's an awesome system. Moving on. The next RPG that we're talking about is Dungeon Crawl Classics. Dungeon Crawl Classics is complicated, to say the least. I don't think it's officially part of the OSR movement, the Old School Revolution. But, like here, to read directly from the Wikipedia page, the design ethos is summed up by the following statement included in every DCC module, regardless of which underlying rule set it's written for. Remember the good old days when adventurers were underground, NPCs were there to be killed, and the finale of every dungeon was the dragon on the 20th level? Those days are back. Dungeon Crawl Classics don't waste your time with long-winded speeches, weird campaign settings, or NPCs who aren't meant to be killed. Each adventure is 100% good, solid dungeon crawl with the monsters you know, the traps you fear, and the secret doors you know are there somewhere. So the entire idea of Dungeon Crawl Classics was to bring back the idea of the classic dungeon crawl. If anyone's unfamiliar with the term dungeon crawl is basically what we were talking about as far as like original D&D and D&D basic. The idea of the entirety of your adventure is going through a very large dungeon. Like, that's the entire point. And some of the things that make dungeon crawls as interesting as they are is a lot of times you have to rely on resource management in order to do. As you get further and further into the dungeon, you have to start going, okay, is it in my best interest to push forward, or should I retreat back so I can restock supplies, and stuff like that. And so while the One Ring was created to get kind of the idea, the inspiration behind Dungeons & Dragons back into tabletop RPGs, Dungeon Crawl Classics was specifically designed to get the actual implementation of that idea back into tabletop RPGs. Because, again, starting in the kind of mid-2000s, and then especially when she got into the 2010s with things like the Apocalypse World system and stuff like that, you started seeing this much larger emphasis on storytelling and, you know, exploration and the things like that, and the idea of, and having, you know, meaningful NPC interactions and stuff like that, and the idea of just a flat out dungeon crawl had become extremely unpopular. It was considered very kind of unintuitive and kind of like weak writing, effectively. And Dungeon Crawl Classics was designed specifically to go, no, we like dungeon crawls. We don't want to have, a moral quandary every single time we play the game. Sometimes we just want to go and kill monsters. So yeah, we have two games that were published within a year of each other, where one is putting a much larger emphasis on, hey, the journey and the story behind it is just as important as the action scenes. And then a few months later, we have, no, we really don't care about this story. We are here for the action. We want just a bloody mess and bad guys to kill and treasure to loot. So yeah, I always find it really, really fascinating that that's how it like both of those ideas develop or kind of made a reemergence at almost the exact same time, and both are still very popular today. So, moving on. The next RPG that we're talking about is Dungeon World. So, quick disclaimer. One of the creators of Dungeon World, gentleman by the name of Adam Koebel, is no longer welcome in most tabletop RPG spaces because people found out that he's not a great person in general. He's got some kind of screwed up ideas, and there was an incident. He actually used to be the in-house GM for Roll20. He was running a game. He was streaming a game. I can't remember who he was streaming it for. I don't think it was Roll20 though. He was streaming a game, and during that game, he basically described in detail a certain form of assault that, if I go into too many more details, gets YouTube mad. But he kind of played that out, or forced one of his characters to go through an experience like that, and giggled and laughed maniacally during the entire time. And then that entire group disbanded. More things came out. He made a really bad apology, and now he doesn't exist. So me talking about Dungeon World is not me trying to say anything nice about that particular person. I'm not a fan of them. I'm very happy that they're no longer a part of the tabletop RPG world. However, Dungeon World in and of itself was pretty instrumental, specifically in the Powered by the Apocalypse world. So Dungeon World is a Powered by the Apocalypse system. And the thing about it was Dungeon World was designed to effectively be D&D, but empowered by the apocalypse. So like your what would be called playbooks in any other Powered by the Apocalypse game, you have classes, which are Bard, Cleric, Fighter, Immolator, Paladin, Ranger, Thief, or Wizard. And you have 6 ability scores. Most Powered by the Apocalypse game tend to limit you to 4 ability scores. So this one has a lot that makes it similar to D&D, but it still fits into that. It still uses moves instead of abilities and stuff like that. It has an experience point system, but it's not the same as how XP works in D&D. And it was massively popular. According to the Wikipedia page, more than a year after being launched, it was still the 8th fastest current seller at DriveThruRPG, which was the place to buy digital copies of tabletop RPGs. So it was massive. It won the 2012 Golden Geek RPG of the Year, 2012 Indie RPG Game of the Year, and it also won the award for Best Support and Best Production. And it was the Best Rules Gold winner at the 2013 ENnie Awards. So this was a massive game. The text of the game was eventually released under a Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 unported license. So it basically meant that the core rules of the games are Creative Commons, so anyone can use Dungeon World to create their own stuff, which again is very, very different from like the OGL, where yes, you could create content using D&D, but you were limited under the OGL, which people found out later on was not quite as free as people assumed it was. Creative Commons is very, very different. As long as, like for Creative Commons attribution license, as long as you acknowledge, hey, this stuff is from Dungeon World, then you can do anything that you want. The entire purpose of the Creative Commons license is to encourage creativity, to encourage derivative products. So let's try this one more time. While Apocalypse World was popular, it wasn't like massive, and it did win a few awards. Dungeon World is really what started the Powered by the Apocalypse avalanche, where now there are tons of Powered by the Apocalypse games. You can't, in TTRPG spaces, you can't walk more than 3 steps without tripping over a Powered by the Apocalypse game. They are absolutely everywhere, and Dungeon World is one of the big reasons why it became as popular as it was. Adam Koebel himself was very, very popular. Again, he worked for Roll20. He also partnered with JP. I can't remember JP's handle anymore, but they ran one of the most popular tabletop RPG based YouTube channels on YouTube. Like, they predated Critical Role by a pretty decent amount, and were extremely popular until all the fallout with Koebel happened. So yeah, it wasn't just that Dungeon World was a good game. It was extremely popular. It had a very charismatic face, and it became kind of the rallying cry behind the idea of, yeah, we don't want corporate tabletop RPGs anymore. We want our own kind of stuff. So yeah, moving on. The next RPG we're talking about, again published in 2012, is the Star Wars role-playing game. Now, there had been Star Wars role-playing games before. There'd actually been, at this point, there'd been 2 other iterations of Star Wars role-playing game that I'm familiar with. There was the old D6 powered one, and then when D20, the D20 system came out, there was a D20 version of the Star Wars role-playing game. If you've ever played Knights of the Old Republic or Knights of the Old Republic 2, they use the D20-based Star Wars role-playing game system. So if you played either of those games, you're at least familiar with how the basics of the system works. Again, video game is not tabletop, but the same basic, the bones are still there. In 2012, Fantasy Flight Games created their own Star Wars role-playing game. And this one is very, very different from most of the other Star Wars role-playing game, because first of all, it uses a dice pool style system, but it actually takes a lesson from Fudge, if you remember Fudge from our 80s to talk, and then Fate, or maybe it was the 90s, I can't remember, and then Fate from the last video, where you actually had special dice that you would roll that would have different symbols on them, as opposed to adding numbers up or checking numbers against things. And the other thing that I've always thought was interesting about the Star Wars role-playing game is it also has a kind of succeed with a cost style thing, because the basic mechanic of the Star Wars role-playing game is you would have these kind of successes and failures, which I can't remember what they call them in the Star Wars role-playing game. But in addition to that, you would basically have the light side and the dark side, which again, I can't remember the exact, what they called the mechanics of it. But you could succeed with good, or you could fail with good. And the same thing was true. You could fail with bad or the dark side, or you could succeed or you could fail with good. And so what that meant is instead of having just three different options as we come now, where you have fail, succeed at a cost, or succeed, you now have fail, but something good happens because of the failure, succeed at a cost, and then full on succeed. You now have four different variations depending on how the dice rolled. And so because of that, again, once you start having more options for a single roll, kind of the idea of degrees of success and degrees of failure, it creates significantly more interesting storytelling that you can do. And again, it encourages the players to make their choices. When we fast forward to things like Blades in the Dark, which we don't really talk about, that I'm not going to be talking about in this one much, just because it's another Powered by the Apocalypse game. It's still very different, but it's still a Powered by the Apocalypse game. And then eventually what made its way into Daggerheart, which was the idea of your hope and despair rolls, or I can't remember what they're called, where you could succeed with hope or you could succeed with despair. This is the same thing. This idea of you could succeed but still have a bad thing happen, or you could fail but still have a good thing happen. A lot of that didn't technically, I think, originate with the Star Wars role-playing game, but the Star Wars role-playing game definitely encapsulated it. And theoretically, the Star Wars role-playing game is supposed to still be being published by Edge Studios. Now, we have been waiting since 2020 for them to reprint the core books so that new people can get into this as a system. Another thing that's fun about the Fantasy Flight Edge Studio version of the Star Wars role-playing game, it has never been sold digitally. It only exists as hardcover books, and those books have been out of print since like 2019. Edge Studios keeps claiming that they're going to be making a reprint of them so new players can get into it, but I have not seen it thus far, and right now getting your hands on any of those books is really expensive. But it is a very, very cool system. It's a super fun system to play. And there's technically 3 different systems in there that are all cross-compatible. You have Edge of the Empire, you have Age of Rebellion, and then you have Force and Destiny. Edge of the Empire is your more kind of standard space stuff. Age of Rebellion, you're dealing with smugglers and rebels and stuff like that. Then Force and Destiny is the Jedi book. Yeah, cool system, cool ideas. Moving on. The next game we are going to talk about is Lasers and Feelings. This is another game that massively changed how tabletop role-playing games work. And one of the interesting things about it, I've got the actual itch.io page for the game up. And the first line about it is, Lasers and Feelings is a quick play role-playing game based on the songs of the Double Clicks. The Double Clicks is this really cool indie band. They're very kind of geek adjacent. They've done a lot of different things for a lot of different stuff. But Lasers and Feelings created an entire new genre of tabletop RPGs called Lasers and Feelings Hacks. And the thing about Lasers and Feelings is Lasers and Feelings intentionally was created with the idea of, hey, we want you to use this system to create your own games. The only thing you have to do is mention that you got the idea from Lasers and Feelings. It is what I refer to them as one-page RPGs because the entire rule set fits on a single 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. I have run multiple versions of Lasers and Feelings hacks. The first one that I ran was a hack called Library Cats, where you play cats that are the librarians of a magic library. So you are magical cats that run a library. It's fun as hell. And then I created my own Lasers and Feelings hack called Courage and Cuddles, where you play stuffed animals and things like that that protect sleeping children from nightmares. Like, just an adorable little game. I haven't published it anywhere, but I did run a session of it for Zelda Universe. If you go to twitch.tv/Zelda Universe TV, you go to the video section. If you look for, I think they still call it the hiatus or something, but there's a collection of videos where it was just the one-shots, games that we ran between our first campaign, Realms of the Wild, and our second campaign, Tears of the Realms. One of them is my Courage and Cuddles game, and it's adorable. The thing with Lasers and Feelings is its design, like Lasers and Feelings and the various Lasers and Feelings hacks, the best thing about them, the only thing you need to play is a D6, or some of them will use up to 3d6, and this single page. And you can start a game literally within minutes. Like character creation, everything that you need to be able to play the game can all be done in about 5 minutes. No matter how large a group that you're doing, that's the beauty of one-page RPGs. So if you're at like Comic-Con and you've got a 2-hour wait to get into Hall C or something like that, you can just pull out this little piece of paper and turn to the people next to you guys and go, hey, do you guys want to play some Lasers and Feelings? And you have everything that you need to run the game right there. Couple dice, a single piece of paper, and you get to go. That's all you need. It's unbelievably amazing. And again, now, as far as Lasers and Feelings hacks, I'm going to see... I'm going to see if we have like a list somewhere. Okay, so somebody actually went and created a list that was made in May of 2022, and it had 177 different hacks. And I will guarantee you that's not all of them. That's nowhere near all of them, especially since this is now 2 years. This is old. And some of the different genres, like dystopian sci-fi, Star Wars, Doctor Who, zombie apocalypse, steampunk, superheroes, animal characters. I wonder if they have library cats in that one. Cryptids, monsters, paranormal and supernatural, schools into the teens, cosmic horror, mystery detective, westerns. You know, they go on and on and on and on and on. They are wonderful, they're amazing, and they took the world by storm. Again, it's another one of those ideas of somebody created something and then put it out in the world and said, please be as creative with this as you want. I'm not trying to make shit tons of money off this. I want people to create interesting things. And yeah, it's amazing and wonderful. Moving on. The next RPG that we are covering is 13th Age. Published in 2013. This is another one that technically used the D20 OGGGGL, but went so far further than that it created something really, really unique. So the thing with 13th Age. 13th Age is kind of pitched as the idea behind 13th Age is it is the best of 3rd edition and 4th edition to the Dungeons and Dragons. There was a lot of good stuff in Dungeons and Dragons, but the massive amount of rules bloat and just how over-designed the system was makes it not fun for a lot of people. there are a lot of amazing things about fourth edition, but the really large deviation from third edition, the kind of power-based system, and it was still over-designed, made it a hard sell on a lot of people. So 13th Age was designed to kind of designed to take the best parts of both of those systems and create a unique system, which is awesome. I love 13th Age. I backed the 13th Age second edition Kickstarter that happened, I think, earlier this year. It's an amazing system. Probably, again, as far as like groundbreaking in the tabletop RPG space, this is another kind of example of, despite the fact that, yes, we're going to use a D20 based system, we're not just going to create a clone of 3rd edition. 13th Age is still D&D-esque. But because it took so much inspiration from 4th edition, it doesn't feel anything like 3rd edition. It feels a little bit like 4th edition, but it is unique enough that it's its own thing. It's an absolute blast to create characters in. I haven't had a chance to actually play 13th Age, but I did an entire discovering new dragons and designing new dragons on the 13th Age. The other thing that I think 13th Age does better than almost any other system is part of creating your character is you have to create one unique thing about your character. Why is your character different than every other version of that particular character class? And it really forces players to think about, okay, well, why is my character unique? Why am I doing something? Why isn't somebody else a part of this party? And I really, really like that. It helps characters, or it helps players feel significantly more connected to their character, because now you're not a paladin. You are the specific paladin that has this specific unique aspect about them that is tied to the game world. The other thing that I think 13th Age does really well that I wish other systems would do is there are these influential characters in there. I can't remember what they're referred to in the game right now. But basically, they're kind of like deities and pseudo-deities and leaders of countries, and they're basically characters that actually actively interact with the world. And part of creating your characters, you have relationships with these characters. Not like, oh, that's my boyfriend. No, at least one or two of these extremely influential, important characters have had some sort of interaction with you. And they can have a positive opinion of you. They can have a negative opinion of you, or they can have a neutral opinion of you. And because of that, whenever your characters are interacting in a place where that particular paragon, or whatever they're called, has influence, it actually changes how the game works. Because if you're in an area where you have a negative relationship with the person in charge, things are going to go significantly worse for you. Whereas same thing's happening, but the person in charge actually has a positive opinion of you, well, then you might start seeing that town guards are significantly more likely to help you, or that rules might be bent a little for you, or laws might be, breaking certain laws might be overlooked for you, simply because you're in good with the people in power. And then when you have two party members where one of them has a positive relationship with one of these people and one of them has a negative relationship with them, that creates really interesting things for the GM to do. So overall, I love 13th Age. I think it's amazing. And while it does not have anywhere near the effect on the market as something like Apocalypse World or Dungeon World or even Lasers and Feelings, it's still created some unique systems that I would like to see proliferate a little bit more than they actually have. So, moving on. The next game we are talking about, also published in 2013, is Numenera. Numenera is the first version of the Cypher system. In the same way that the Dragon Age RPG was the first version of the Age system RPGs, Numenera was the first version of the Cypher system RPGs, and it was created by a gentleman named Monty Cook. Monty Cook had worked on previous versions of D&D and was pretty well known throughout the tabletop RPG space. And so they started a Kickstarter for Numenera, which is going to be Monty Cook's own custom tabletop RPG. And the Kickstarter campaign for it set a record for most money raised for a tabletop role-playing game. And they raised $517,255 to get this game going. If anyone is unaware, I am currently running a Cypher System powered game. Tears of the Realms uses the Cypher System, and it's something that I absolutely adore, and been having a ton of fun running it. The Cypher System in and of itself is amazing. Probably the most unique aspect of the Cypher System is character creation. Character creation, when it's all boiled down, is you write a sentence. I am an adjective I'm an adjective noun who verbs. I am a blank blank who blanks. That's how you create your character. Now, each one of those things has different effects on your character. Like the adjective is referred to as your descriptor. Is that what it is? I can't remember. Kermit the Frog here saying. Cypher System Rulebook. Okay, characters. The adjective is your descriptor, which for the most part is equivalent to kind of like a race in other tabletop RPGs, where it gives you some mild changes to how your character plays, and will modify a few things about it, but it's not the most groundbreaking or most important decision that you make. Your type is effectively your character class. That one's going to have a significantly larger impact on how your character plays. Specifically where you get to invest points in your pools and the things like that, and your edge and all that. And then the verb is what's called your focus. And your focus is effectively your subclass. But one of the interesting things about the Cypher System in general is any type can take any focus. So unlike D&D, where your choice of subclasses is contingent on your choice of base class, you can mix any focus with any type and any combination of abilities to create these really interesting, unique characters. The Cypher System in and of itself is also unique in the idea that the GM never rolls. It's one of the reasons I like the Cypher System. Players do make all the rolls. When players are attacking or attempting to use a skill or something like that, they make rolls. And then when enemies are attacking, the players make defense rolls. The other thing that's unique about it is you never add anything to your D20 roll. The only thing that you do when you modify how difficult a roll is, you actually change the difficulty number for it. And it always, or almost always, goes up or down in intervals of 3. So it's a really interesting kind of halfway between a rules light and a rules heavy system, because there are a decent amount of rules in here, but they are generic and enough and vague enough that you can make your own interpretations 9 times out of 10. Again, I'm using the Cypher system to run a Legend of Zelda themed tabletop RPG where the characters that we currently have playing are a Rito, which is a bird person, with shadow powers, is the base class, who eventually gets the ability to clone themselves with light and control plants, depending on the focus, and they can change focuses. And then we have a Hylian who has a pet Arctic fox that is actually some kind of spirit thing that the players haven't figured out exactly what it is, but it can merge with the Hylian girl to give her Aurora Borealis based powers, and she eventually gets the ability to control lightning with one of her focuses and build robots with another one. We have a character who is entirely based around the idea that they design and sell shields for surfing. So they are a shield-based character that eventually gets the power to grow like Ant-Man. And I can't remember what the other one... and turns into a cyborg in the other one. We have a character, which is a very... very charismatic Sheikah that has control over lots and lots and lots of different magic, and eventually gets a magic sword, and I can't remember what they got in the other world, but it was cool. And then finally, we have a circus performer who throws unlimited daggers that eventually gets the ability to mind meld with computers and shrink down to tiny size, a la Ant-Man again. So yeah, all of that stuff, all of these strange characters that half of them I probably couldn't really make in D&D, I made them in the Cypher system, and they're so much fun. It's such a real cool thing. None of that would exist without Numenera, which Numenera in and of itself is a fascinating system, because effectively the campaign setting is set in what's called the Ninth World. The reason it's called the Ninth World is there has been 8 complete civilizations that have grown, existed, and then been wiped out before this civilization goes. And so the big focus of Numenera is exploration and discovery, because there are all these previous civilization ruins and things like that exist, and one of the most important aspects of these previous civilizations are these things called ciphers. Ciphers are basically one-time use magic items or abilities that your character gets, and that's the thing that makes the Cypher system so incredible. Is, while yes, you have your set character abilities, you are it is intended that you are kind of constantly getting these ciphers, so that at any given point your character has their base abilities, and then all of these I'm going to try this one more time. Strange, random abilities that aren't really connected to anything. And they can be literally anything. You might have something simple like a healing potion, or you might have something that allows you to take anything, any carved object that has a face-like structure, animate that, and have a conversation and ask it any questions you want about things it would know about, i.e. stuff that has happened around it. It's amazing. It's fun. It was definitely groundbreaking. Again, it was one of the first really, really big tabletop RPG Kickstarters. Traveler 5th Edition was the one that had the previous record for most money raised for a TTRPG. So, yeah. Moving on. The next game we are covering goes all the way to 2016. It is a variant of the Cypher system, published by Monte Good Games, and it's called No Thank You Evil. Um, no Thank You Evil isn't technically a full tabletop RPG. It's listed as a storytelling adventure game. The reason that I'm talking about it is No Thank You Evil is specifically tailored towards children. It is designed effectively to be baby's first RPG. Is this the first tabletop RPG that has ever been kind of focused on kids? I don't think so. I would have a hard time believing that it was absolutely the first one. But it is one of the most successful games that was specifically tailored towards not just kids, but young children. And the reason it's called No Thank You Evil is there's a mechanic built into the game where if things start getting too scary or anything for the players, they can just go No Thank You Evil, and it's done. And so, whenever you're dealing with young children in general, it they take things very, very seriously, and make believe is very, very important to them, and so they can become significantly more invested in imaginary things than most adults can. And so, playing tabletop RPGs with kids, especially something like Dungeons and Dragons, where there's death and destruction and stuff like that, can be really, really traumatic for very young children. And No Thank You Evil is specifically designed around that. It's specifically on the box lists ages 5 and up, effectively. So it's made for really young children, and it's a fantastic little system. It uses the Cypher system, but it has, again, an extremely kind of pared down version of the Cypher system to make it very simple and easy for kids to play. And it is a perfect way to kind of introduce tabletop role-playing games to your young kids. Because again, starting them off with D&D or Pathfinder or something like that, you are going to mess them up permanently. If for no other reason than they haven't even really learned how most math works at age 5. So having them doing advanced calculations and all that stuff is going to be really rough. So something like No Thank You Evil is this really great way to introduce young kids to the idea of tabletop RPGs. And it's fantastic. It's a super unique game. When we move forward and we start talking about Essence 20 stuff, eventually the My Little Pony RPG is kind of built along the same theory of No Thank You Evil, where it is designed to be for a younger crowd. They do take the Essence 20 system and simplify it down so that young kids can play it. I don't think it's aimed at quite as young as No Thank You Evil, but you can see this idea kind of spreading throughout the tabletop RPG space. Maybe not entirely spurred by No Thank You Evil, but definitely encouraged by it. So, moving on. The next game we are talking about, and just like there were tons of D20 games, there's tons of Powered by the Apocalypse. Like, just in... I forgot about that one. I guess we can talk about this first then. So I was going to talk about something, but I just realized that I missed this. So the next game we are talking about came out in 2016, and it's called Ryutama. Ryutama is a Japanese role-playing game. Again, we talked about Sword World and how influential that was in the Japanese market, and the fact that you can't actually play Sword World in English officially. There's never been an English translation. Well, Ryutama is another Japanese published tabletop RPG. The big difference being there are English translations for it, and Ryutama is designed to kind of mimic the feeling of Hayao Miyazaki style anime. It is an adorable, wonderful, wholesome RPG experience just in general. And it is one of the first Japanese published RPGs to actually get significant kind of play in the States. Again, it's not that Japan isn't creating tabletop RPGs. They are. They have quite a few that are really, really interesting. However, they tend to stay in Japan. And Ryutama didn't. It was released worldwide. And while it's not, it's not D&D or Pathfinder or anything like that as far as popularity is concerned, it does have a devoted fan base, and it started inspiring other people to start making more anime inspired things. I want to look real quick because I don't think it was the first. Yeah, it wasn't the first kind of anime inspired tabletop RPG. I don't know what the official first one, but one of the first ones is an RPG called Big Eyes Small Mouth that came out in '97 that I just completely missed in my 90s thing. But Ryutama did inspire quite a few other ones, things like what is it called? Break, which is an anime-inspired RPG. Fabula Ultima, which I ran an entire campaign in. All those things can kind of trace their roots back to Ryutama. So, yeah. Now, moving on. So other Powered by the Apocalypse stuff, Blades in the Dark, which actually is listed as one of the inspirations for I think both Candela Obscura and Daggerheart. Bluebeard's Bride is another Powered by the Apocalypse one that's incredible. City of Mist, another Powered by the Apocalypse. Honey Heist, one of the most popular Lasers and Feelings hacks, came out in 2017. What is this one again? You're not going to tell me, are you? Damn it. Okay, we'll just keep going until I find it. Masks: A New Generation is another Powered by the Apocalypse. There is... Did I miss it? There it is. Oh, we're going all the way to 2019 for this one. That's why. Okay, I guess I'm not. Thought I was going to sneeze again. So, in 2019, a game called Kids on Bikes was published. Kids on Bikes is what I refer to as a nostalgia RPG. Kids on Bikes is a tabletop RPG that's meant to kind of emulate the old kind of like 80s style coming of age films, things like The Goonies, and eventually things like Stranger Things, stuff like that. You know, back when the 80s was having that huge nostalgia surge, that's what Kids on Bikes was kind of a part of. And there's been multiple flavors of it. There was Teens in Space. There's Kids on Brooms. And they're currently working on a superhero version called Kids in Capes. So the entire kind of thought process behind the Kids on Bikes system, it's another kind of rules light system, but it's meant to kind of fit into those tropes that you saw in old 80s and like very early 90s movies like the Goonies, where you have these kids that are getting put on getting put into a situation that kids shouldn't have to deal with, and they eventually get to like save the town or something like that. Um, it is it is a nonsense wonderful game. Um, Lots of really interesting stuff. It won a bunch of awards. Um, and it's been used in Dimension 20 has used it a few times. They recently released a kind of hack of Kids on Bikes called Never Stop Blowing Up. So yeah, it's a nostalgia based rules light RPG, and it's wonderful. So you should definitely to check it out. Moving on. The final tabletop RPG we will be discussing for 2019 is Lancer. And I'm going to be honest here. The only reason I'm talking about Lancer is I'm currently running a Lancer game. Running it Monday nights. I don't think Lancer has been... I don't think Lancer has been a massive game-changing thing in the tabletop RPG space, but I wish it was. As far as like mech-based tabletop RPGs, for the most part, you really just have BattleTech, and that's about it. Lancer takes the idea of kind of anime mech stuff and turns it into a tabletop RPG, and it's an absolute blessing to play. It's the reason that I'm running it for my tabletop RPG, or for my Daily December campaign, is because I just wanted to play it for so long. Everything about this system is just lovely. It's relatively rules light. Like there's a decent amount of rules to it. The vast majority of them are around combat, but it is designed to be generic enough that you can kind of create your own characters and create your own mechs that are unique enough to be able to do cool stuff. And the way that we're using it is, instead of them being mechs, they are power suits, like what Samus uses in the Metroid thing. So I had to make mention of Lancer. It's not, groundbreaker or anything like that, but it is important to me. So, moving on. I know I said that was the last one, but this is the actual last one. The final RPG that we are talking about is Open Legend. Open Legend coined itself as the first Open Legend coined itself as the first open source tabletop RPG. Open Legend in and of itself is one of my favorite RPG systems I've ever run. Realms of the Wild, the first tabletop RPG that I ran for Zelda Universe, used Open Legend, and we had so much fun playing that game. The system itself, the entirety of the system is available for free on OpenLegendRPG.com. You can get the entire core rulebook there in pretty easy to follow. Like, the whole website is based around you being able to go through and find everything that you want. They did run into, because it was a Kickstarter project, Matt Mercer was one of the people that was consulted on it. I think Ed Greenwood also consulted on it. And what it turned into is this really brilliant, skill-based, very generic tabletop RPG that you can literally use to run anything. Again, I used it to run a Zelda-themed campaign where the characters were a Goron that used a bomb to that used bombs to solve literally every problem. A Rito bard that could never remember that he could fly. a Sheikah techie, like a Sheikah technology specialist who was constantly inventing new things. A Zora vampire, for lack of a better term. A Zora that had the ability to drain the life out of enemies. And then finally, we eventually added another Sheikah with shadow-based powers. And all of them worked perfectly well. And we had so much fun. The thing that makes the Open Legends system so interesting is what's called their Banes and Boons system, where basically you invest in a skill, and depending on the amount of points you've invested in that skill, you gain access to a bunch of different Banes or Boons that would use that skill. And you use a combination of Banes and Boons to create any kind of attack that you want. You want, an ice-based spell that freezes people? Well, then you invest in energy, and we call that ice whenever you make an attack with it. And then if you want to freeze someone, you use the immobile Bane as part of that. So it's an incredibly modular, very open to interpretation system that unfortunately ran into some management issues, which kind of killed any progress. The original creator, I think, is actually no longer involved with the system anymore, and they handed it over to someone else to kind of finish dealing with everything. Support for Open Legend died almost immediately. But I'm hoping someday it comes back, because it is by far one of my favorite systems ever. And as far as how it affected the tabletop RPG market, it's another one of those where I wish it had affected the market more, because there's not a lot of people that are familiar with Open Legend. But it is incredibly well designed, and the Bane and Boon system and how the skills work and everything like that is so revolutionary that I really wish we had seen more support of it and seen different campaign settings and different kind of versions of Open Legend, because there's a lot of current tabletop RPGs that could take a few lessons from Open Legend in creating some interesting stuff. So anyway, that is the 2010s in tabletop RPGs. As I've mentioned before, at this point, I was actively playing tabletop RPGs in this era. So I remember when a lot of stuff started happening. I remember the Kobol incident. I remember when Powered by the Apocalypse became like the biggest thing ever. I remember Lasers and Feelings turning into massive things. I guess I forgot in 2014. That was the one thing that they wouldn't list it on here for whatever reason. 5th edition D&D came out in 2014 as well. Let's not forget that was a thing. 2014 5th edition D&D came out. And that changed the world. But everybody knows about this and that. And the entire purpose of this is to talk about all the stuff that people don't know about. So yes, I was actually playing tabletop RPGs and was invested in them at this point. However, there's always a chance I missed something. So if I did miss a really big game, or like a few of the entries on here, if there was a game that you are upset that it didn't catch on nearly as much as it should have, put them down in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, it's all for me today. I'll see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.